everyone, in this video we are going to discuss the important dates and also the committees that we need to remember when it comes to the national policies on education. So what do you mean by this national policies on education? So this NPEs or national policies on education is a policy that was introduced or formulated by the government of India in order to promote and regulate the education system of India. So considering the history, we have three important national policies on education, or there are three national policies on education which were established in India, and the first ever education policy in India was formulated in the year 1968, and it was during the period of Mrs. Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister, and this particular national policy was based mainly on the recommendations of Kothari Commission. So this is what we are going to look at. So we'll be focusing on the three important national policies on education, the year in which it came to exist or the year in which they were formulated, and also the recommendations of which committee actually contributed to each of these policies. So this is what we are going to look at. So the first ever policy was introduced in 1968 during the period of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and it based mainly on the recommendations of Kothari Commission. Moving to the next one, the second national policy on education of India was formulated in the year 1986. So the national policy of education of 1986 is a result of the reviews which was discussed and adopted during the budget session of 1985 when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. So the second national policy on education was formulated in 1986, and it was during the period of Rajiv Gandhi. So it was basically an outcome, or it was actually discussed and adopted during the budget session of the 1985. Yeah, so that is all about the second national education policy. So the first one was in 1968 and the second one was in 1986. But there are certain things that you have to remember when it comes to this particular policy of education in 1986. Later on in 1990, a committee was set up under the chairmanship of Acharya Ramamurthy in order to review the national policy of education and to make recommendation for its modifications. So we already said that the second national policy on education of India was introduced in the year 1986, but later in 1990 a committee was formulated under the chairmanship of Acharya Ramamurthy, and what was the objective of creating such a committee? It was actually formulated in order to review this particular national policy on education of 1986 and in order to make recommendations on its modification. And this committee has actually introduced it actually submitted its report in December 1990. And later on, what we can see here is at the request of the Central Advisory Board of Education, a committee again was set up in 1991 under the chairmanship of Sri N. Janardhan Reddy. And what was the focus or the objective of creating such committee? It was actually created in order to consider the modifications in national policy on education of 1986 basically. And this committee submitted its report in January 1992. So what happened here? We already said that the second national policy on education of India was actually introduced in the year 1986. But later in 1990, a review committee was formed under the chairmanship of Acharya Ramamurthy. And what was the focus of this particular committee? They are actually formulated in order to review and to make recommendations on the modifications of national policy on education of 1986. And they have submitted their report in December, or they have submitted their report in 1990 itself, and precisely in December. And later on, at the request of the Central Advisory Board of Education, another committee was set up in 1991 under the chairmanship of Sri N. Janardhan Reddy. And this committee was formulated in order to consider the modification in national policy on education, national policy of education. Alright, and this committee submitted its report in January 1992. So actually this particular committee was created in order to, or they have created their report taking into consideration the report of Ramamurthy committee or the review committee, and they were actually focusing on, or they were adopting the recommendations that were put forth by that particular committee in the year 1990. Alright, so these 3 years are very important. Alright, so the first year associated with the national policy on education, the second national policy on education is 1986, we have already said that. And after that in 1990, a review committee was formulated, and in 1992, again we can say that this national policy on education was actually modified. Coming to the third national policy of education, and it was formulated or promulgated by the Government of India by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2020, and this is the new education policy, a very important topic that you have to study when it comes to your next exam, and it focuses on reducing curriculum content to enhance essential learning, critical thinking, and more holistic experiential, discussion based and analysis based learning. So this is what this 2020 national education policy focuses on. So it focuses on reducing curriculum content, and also it focuses on holistic development of the learner. And the committee that is associated with this particular national education policy or the new education policy is a committee that was formulated in June 2017 under Dr. K. Kasturirangan. So this as a committee was formulated in order to prepare the national education policy. So this is again important, and we have just mentioned some of the important dates that you have to remember when it comes to the third national education policy. The committee was formulated in 2017 June, and it was under the chairmanship of Dr. K. Kasturirangan, and they have submitted their report on May 31st, 2019, and the cabinet, the Union Cabinet has approved the report on 29th July 2020. So these are some of the important dates that you can remember. So why is it very important? I have already said you that we need to remember certain dates and also certain committees which are very important from this national education policy point of view. So we have three different policies that came into existence in India based on or focusing on education. One in 1968, the second one in 1986, and we have also look into the important dates that are associated with it, and also some of the committees that were associated with the 1986 National Policy on Education, and also the third one, the new education policy which came into existence in 2020. We have discussed the committees and also the dates that you have to remember. So why is it important? Because you can expect questions in this manner. So if you just consider the exam that happened very recently, this is a sample question that you can see from the economic shift. So this is from December 2021 and June 2022 merge cycles. So the question goes like this: previous national education policy on education 1986 was modified in the year. And we have the options 1990, 1992, 1987 and 1996. So we have already discussed about this. The right answer for this question is option B, that is 1992. So this is just a sample question that I have took from the very recent exam that happened. So this is a very important area when you are looking into the different national policies on education. These dates and also the committees associated with these three are very important, and also you have to look at these three national education policies in a very detailed manner. You can just go through the recommendations, the important recommendations, and especially you have to look at very seriously, or you have to focus or you have to consider the new education policy as well, because we are getting a lot of questions from the new education policy, as it is a very recent thing that happened in the education sector of India. So that is all about this video. So make sure that this is a very important area, this national policies on education. It's a very important area, and also when you're studying, make sure that you're focusing on the details that we have mentioned here, and also the recommendations too. So thanks for watching and happy learning.